In 2008, I cycled from London to Paris with my wife, and that is an awful lot like writing a book. We didn't just cycle to Paris for any old reason. Who would do that? That would be crazy. We cycled to raise money for the Stroke Association. There were two reasons we wanted to do this. First of all, I wanted to continue my attempt at being a brilliant human being. And secondly, my novel, Eis for Angelica, is about stroke. It's about a man who has to care for his wife, who has suffered a stroke. So it wasn't just a completely crazy idea. There was actually some thinking behind it. There was actually some kind of social motive, if you will. Of course, when I started out and when I signed up, I thought that it would be not easy, but I thought, well, come on, how hard can it be? At that point, I was a relatively fit person. I hadn't had 2 children, and I thought this was going to be fine. But of course, about a month before, I realised that it was actually going to be extremely painful, difficult, and actually quite upsetting at times as well. So to try and make the whole experience less painful, in the weeks leading up to the cycle, I did some very important things. First, I bought the most expensive bike I could possibly buy, and that wasn't very expensive. Secondly, I bought some lycra. Now, this was the first time that I'd ever bought lycra, and although it was quite difficult to get my head around, amongst other things, I did do it, and it paid off in the end. Thirdly and finally, I actually did some cycling. Now, I know that you might think that that should go at the top of the list, but that's not really how I saw it at the time. Anyway, one thing led to another, and before you know it, you're in your lycra and you've got your bike and you're on the start line and you're about to cycle to Paris. Day one saw us cycle from London to Portsmouth, which is on the south coast of England. Obviously, it's on the south coast of England, because if you're going to get to another country, generally speaking, you do have to go to the coast. Actually, that's ridiculous, isn't it? If you're going to another country, then you could just fly. That's probably how you would do it. You wouldn't need to go to the coast to do that. You need to go to an airport. Anyway, it was on that first day that I realised that this was going to be a lot like writing a book, because that first day I was quite excited. I thought, this is going to be fantastic. This is the first part of what is a 3-day struggle, and this is going to be absolutely no problem whatsoever. 10 miles in, this is going to be fantastic. 20 miles in, this is going to be fine. I've just stopped, I've had a sandwich, I've had a cup of tea. How could anything go wrong on this bike ride? Towards the end of day one, I felt like my thighs were actually on fire. And I don't know if your legs have ever felt like they were on fire, but what it feels like is like they're on fire. So of course, at the end of the day in the hotel room, I was in quite some pain, and I was having to apply some deep heat to my thighs and my calves and some shave cream to other places. And I didn't think it at the time because I was in so much pain, but actually the first stage of writing a book is much the same. You get quite excited, and after a few pages, after a few thousand words, you continue to be excited. And it's only when you really get a third into a book that you start to realise that you're in an awful lot of anguish, and you start to worry about things like, is it any good? Will you ever finish? And why have you got shave cream? Day 2, after an overnight boat trip, we arrived in France. I don't remember which part of France, but it was also on the coast. And once we got there, it was raining. It was raining more than any kind of place has been rained on before. But thankfully, this was actually a much shorter day. And although the pain continued and I was in pretty much agony for much of the journey, the good thing was that it was going to be shorter, just 60 kilometers after the first day's 80 kilometers. And so I felt like, well, this is okay. I've made a commitment now. And although I'm in terrible, terrible pain, this is going to be okay. I've made a commitment. I'm going to finish. And once you've been cycling for a day and a half anyway, you kind of get used to the pain. You kind of just feel like numb, but kind of not just numb in a kind of, oops, I've stubbed my toe kind of way. Numb in a kind of, it's really in the sides of my muscles, it's in the center of my muscles, and it kind of stretches all down the middle of my muscles too. I'm talking about the pain, of course. And this is like the middle part of writing a book, because you've made that commitment. You know that you're going to finish the book now because you've started. How could you possibly not get to the end of this fantastic, brilliant thing that you're doing without actually getting there? You need to get there. You have to get there. You have no choice at this point. But what about the pain? I'm in so much pain. I can barely write another word because I don't know what I'm doing. And I've never done this before. Day 3, and I was in pretty much as much pain as you can possibly imagine. And I know that's not true, but it was quite painful. So this was by far the longest day, 100 kilometers. That's quite a long way. It's about 100 kilometers, and we were cycling right into the middle of Paris. By this point, we've been cycling with the same group of people for 2.5 days, and there's a sense of camaraderie. I'm in tears, my wife's in tears, she can barely, her shoulders sort of hanging off. My legs, well, they're almost not part of me anymore, but we're part of a team now, so it's all going to be okay, and we can see Paris. Problem was, I'd never been to Paris before and I hadn't realised it's actually quite a big place. So although I could see it, I was still about an hour and a half away from it. And then for some reason, because Paris is apparently quite a nice place, our guide, oh yeah, we get a guy who cycles all the time up front, he decides to take in some sights. So there's pain everywhere, there are tears flying all over the place, just sort of coming off the sides of everybody's face as they cycle towards Paris, and we're stopping to look at stuff. And so every time we stop, legs are furious, I'm furious, and I'm thinking, when is this ever going to end? I can see the end. Look, I can see Paris. I can see the Eiffel Tower, for crying out loud. It's massive, but I'm never going to get there. But then we get on the bike again, we inch closer, we get a bit closer, and then eventually we're in bloody Paris. And not only are we in Paris, but it's the most amazing feeling in the world. We feel like it, and I'm not just talking about me and my wife, I'm talking about the entire party, apart from probably the tour guide, who's just happy to have got some nice photos. We're all there and we feel like we've conquered the world. It's absolutely amazing. It was all worth it in the end. And of course, that's very much like writing a novel. Because once you get to the end of a novel, you feel like the best person in the entire world. It doesn't matter if you've written the worst novel ever, you feel darn good about it. So when you're going through the pain of writing a book, when you're really struggling with it, when you feel like you can see the end, but you can never quite reach it, just remember that when you do get there, and you will, it will feel fantastic, and it will be well worth the effort.